to Israel. I'm going to invite us over today and tomorrow and Friday morning to offer blessings. She can carry them in her heart. Debbie and Linda together can carry them in their hearts as they travel on their way to Israel. We can be, as my mom says, in their hip pockets, sending them with blessing along the way. They can place it when they place their hand on the Kotel or anywhere else in Israel that brings deep inspiration and connectivity. They can bring the prayers that we offered here with zeros and ones and digital inspiration. They can transfer that to the physical holy place of our homeland. Friends, this is an interesting part of this week's Parsha. Shoftim really does set up the guidelines to create a just society that is incredibly complicated, as society always is. We must have Shoftim, judges. We must have Shotrim, which in Hebrew is Mishtara. That's the police. So it's not just law, you need legal enforcers. It's like the beginning of Law and Order. If you've been a fan of the show over all these years, right, there are two divisions. There's law, the justice system, and there's the police. And without them, the guidelines of society do not hold. You need to have the rules, and you need to make sure that there's accountability. Through the January 6 hearings and the everyday work of judges of every level of our judicial system, that is what we rely upon in order to know that the world continues to make sense. When we watch the way the Department of Justice right now is handling an incredibly public and thorny issue, the institutions of the state hold us safe. They are the reason that neighbors, first of all, know where their property begins and ends, and what holds those who have jobs and income holds us to account for the welfare of our neighbors so that they too can succeed. Without the enforcement, without the rules, where would we be? Enter into this situation a very strange hope that the Israelites have. In this week's Parsha, chapter 17 of the book of Devarim, there is the desire that the Israelites name to have a king. Now this feels out of order because during these moments, during this time in the desert, before we enter into the land of Israel, the people around us have chieftains, but no kings. So many scholars believe that this section of the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, actually came later and reflected what we know happens in Shmuel Aleph, in the book of 1 Samuel, where the first king of Israel is appointed. That's Shaul, Saul. And the desire is to be just like everyone else. And so this week's Parsha, I'll just read a little bit of the verses in English. If after you have entered the land that Adonai your God has assigned you, and taken possession of it, and settled in it, you decide, quote, I will set a king over me, as do all the nations about me. You shall be free to set a king over yourself, one chosen by Adonai your God. Now listen to the rules. It's fascinating. The rules for setting up a king. Be sure to set as a king over yourself one of your own people. You must not set a foreigner over you, one who is not your kinsman. Moreover, he shall not keep many horses, or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses, since Adonai has warned you, don't go back there again. He shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess. When he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this Torah written for him on a scroll. Let it remain with him, and let him read it all his life. So think about this. When you have an image of a king or a queen, a ruler of any kind, they actually are surrounded by opulence. That's at least the visual image that comes to mind for me. How powerful then to see the Torah say they can't have a lot of gold and silver. They can't have a harem. In the ancient world, that would have sounded radical. They can't have too many horses. Think about politicians and the ranches that they own. Right? They can't have so much, which actually sounds not so king-ish at all. And so what a powerful thing it is to consider what the Torah is saying here, well in advance of the Israelites asking for a king. They're not asking yet, but when they do, because the Torah presumes they will, or this part of the Torah already knows that they have, the guidelines for the king are, you think you have restrictions, they need to have a Torah. They must have a Torah. This king needs to be carrying a Torah with them at all times. When they're seated on the throne, there must be a Torah in their hands. They can't have too much. They have to be one of you. So think about that when it comes to the elected leaders or the religious leaders, someone who's in charge for a time, because we all have terms, even kings do, in most places. For that ruler to have guidelines that even surpass the normal citizens' guidelines, an extra Torah that they carry around wherever they go. In fact, there's a teaching that the king would walk around with that Sefer Torah on a necklace. Wherever they go, they have these rules close to their heart. That means that in Jewish framing, power comes with enormous responsibility. Stan Lieberman, who's known actually as Stan Lee, of blessed memory, who created the Marvel universe that became the Marvel Cinematic Universe, wrote these incredible lines, placed them in the mouth of Uncle Ben, Peter Parker's uncle, that's Spider-Man, and then in the movie version, much later, in his Aunt May's voice. With great power comes great responsibility. That's a great way of summing up this part of the Parsha, which is to say, if you want a king so that you can feel normal, because everyone else has one, hold them accountable. Look at the way that both in America and in Israel and elsewhere around the world, rulers, be they presidents or prime ministers or senators or rabbis or priests or popes or imams, look at how people who occupy roles of power must be held accountable, and look what happens when they don't. The Torah predicts this problem, or accurately describes that the Israelites are not immune. We want to be normal like everyone else, but the price of normalcy should be clear as well. In order to have a system that works, that doesn't abandon the most vulnerable members of society, those at the top of whatever pecking order there is need to be held accountable. They need to remember that there but for the grace of God go they. And that is literally the message here. There but for the grace of God go they. So whether you're in Nairobi, like our dear friend Stephanie Gary, so touched that you're with us where you are, whether you're on your way to Israel, like our friends Debbie or Linda, whether you're in Paris, like our friend Fabrice, or whether you're anywhere else where we find ourselves, Florida and New York, it is incredibly important for us to remember that the Torah presumes that becoming normal comes at a cost. And the way to ensure ethics as we become more normal is to be vigilant about the use and abuse of power. May we be mindful when we occupy influential roles, and may we hold those who occupy roles of power accountable for the sake of everyone. You cannot love your neighbor as yourself unless you are mindful of their vulnerability at the hands of someone who holds power and does not use it rightly. We are always in this cycle. We must always be mindful and vigilant. And if we find ourselves somehow in a position of influence, may we be blessed to remain mindful even then and not be seduced by the trappings of power. Okay, friends, let's have a good day. We'll see each other tomorrow. Can't wait. Bless you all, friends. See you tomorrow.